Kenya. Greetings again, everyone. My name is Teresa Gonzalez, Executive Director of Design Impact. I am pleased and just really elated to introduce you all to the next session. We have with us our first presentation and plenary of the day. I am deeply honored to introduce you to my wonderful colleagues and community champions at Design Impact, also known as Dr. Curtis Webb III, Senior Researcher, and Sarah Robertson, our Senior Social Innovation Specialist. Every day is an absolute joy and inspiration working alongside Dr. Curtis and Sarah. Although they have extensive credentials and achievements in their academic and professional endeavors and through their professional trajectory, I would like to introduce them as the best colleagues to work with, to build with, and share the mantle of the struggle. They are just humble and fierce advocates in so many ways, and just encourage you all to connect with them even one-on-one outside of this session, and continue to see us Design Impact as a resource for you all as grantees. Thank you again, and I'll pass it on to my amazing colleague, Sarah Robertson.
Thank you so much, Teresa, and welcome everyone. We are so thrilled to be with you. Appreciate that warm introduction and that really powerful grounding. It was just a really powerful way to start this session today and connected to what we're going to be talking about. So I am Sarah Robertson.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Curtis Webb.
And we are here today from Design Impact, where we work collaboratively, creatively, and inclusively with organizations and communities to drive equitable social change. So we are here today to talk with you about practicing invitation. So when we think about invitations as they relate to community engagement, we're not just talking about how you invite people in the first place, though that's important too. We think about invitations really as more of an ongoing set of practices, an ongoing way of being that helps folks feel like they belong, like their contributions are going to be valued, like we'll honor the histories and the stories they share, like Ashley just beautifully reminded us of. Like they're gathering together for a reason, and like they're in this work together with us to shape an outcome. So as we go through our conversation today, we'll invite you to reflect on a couple of these core questions. As we're engaging community, what does it take to make someone feel welcomed? What helps them feel safe, included, heard, and valued? And how do we build trust, momentum, and a shared sense of purpose? This practice of invitation, of creating safe and welcoming environments, is especially critical when we're doing work centered around racial equity, social justice, that's rooted in inclusion and dismantling systems of oppression that continue to show up in our communities and our relationships. So with that grounding, we wanted to invite you all in a little bit into the way that Design Impact thinks about working with and not for communities. In order to do that, we keep community at the center in all of our processes. We know that we have to start with relationships, which often means slowing down, right? Building relationships enables us to build trust. It also helps us come into the work with a sense of openness. We know we're going to come into this work learning. You know, we have our eyes wide open, we're going to change our perspectives through this work, and we learn with empathy to those stories, to those histories that folks carry with them, and centering those stories in what we do. We continue to work alongside community as we make sense of what we learn. And then we continue to work with community as we co-create ideas together and move to action to actually try them out. Like Teresa mentioned this morning, DI's work is really centered around sharing power and bringing communities of impact closer to decision making. So when we're working with community, we operate by the principle, nothing about us without us. So to live into that for just a moment, we would like to pause and invite you all to co-create in the space with us. So invite you to just take a moment to think about why you're here and drop in the chat one word that comes to mind when you think about inclusive and equitable community engagement. I'll say, as folks are starting to populate the chat here, this is a big group. Sharing can be intimidating, but we like to invite a space today where we all have something to share. We all have something to learn. So I'm seeing in the chat, togetherness, listening, yes, genuine care, trust, listening again. All of these are so critical in a lot of the pieces that we'll talk about today. Possibility, respect, fun for everyone. Thank you so much for all of these. We'll continue to see what's populating here in the chat. But as we are together today, we recognize, folks are coming at this work from all different places. And we hope that as we move into kind of the core of what we'll talk about today, which is getting into the nuts and bolts of how we practice invitation and community engagement, there's going to be pieces for everyone to take away, whether that's some foundational tips to get you started or some new ways of thinking about the work that you've been doing for a while.
Sarah, I'm loving what I'm seeing in the chat so far. It seems like we are in the right crowd and we're in the right audience. And so I'm excited to be here with you all today. Seeing things like humility, I think that's important. Seeing things like celebration. We oftentimes think that there's no room for celebration, but we have to make room for celebration. So we just appreciate you all sharing a part of your practices with us today. And so what we want to do now is sort of get to some of the what. So as you may know, there's a lot of different definitions on what community engagement is. So we want to share a definition with you today on what we think it is. We want to get to the why, sort of why we think it's important. And finally, we're gonna close our conversation with you today, talking a lot about the how. So what are the, Sarah mentioned, what are the nuts and bolts of it? How, or what are some practices that we have seen that puts community at the center of community engagement? And so we're really, when we say we're going to start at the foundation, we're going to start at the foundation. When we like to think of community engagement, we break it up into two different parts, the community part piece and the engagement piece. As you can see the definition on the screen, the community is a group of connected people by geography, identity, or demographics with shared interests or affiliation. And another piece of language you'll see us use throughout this presentation today is communities of impact, or communities that desire additional support from outsiders or other institutions, et cetera. But this goes hand in hand with engagement. And engagement, simply put, is a commitment to being present, a commitment to sitting with people, to sitting in the mess. Oftentimes when we get into work with community members, community partners, it's messy. We have to be ready to be in the mess, to be in long-standing relationships, to sometimes not be able to come up with solutions immediately and be comfortable with that. And put together, community engagement is working collaboratively with and through groups of people to address issues impacting the well-being of those people. And again, this requires relationship building, development and maintaining trust, developing shared goals, something we're going to talk about a lot, this co-creation process, and consistency or accountability. So at large, again, just want to share this definition. When design impact says, what is community engagement? We saying this means you're working collaboratively with and through groups of people to address issues impacting the well-being of those people. And collaboration could look like co-developed processes. So this means everything from designing from the beginning stages. I think one of the things me and Sarah discussed previously that we've heard from our community partners is community partners say, invite me to the meeting before the meeting. So don't invite me to the meeting where you've already made key decisions, where you've already decided on what we should be doing, but invite me to the meeting before that. Or if you've already made some of those decisions, be prepared to start from scratch. Collaboration should include shared decision-making processes. And so what this looks like is that removing the sort of expert hat that we oftentimes go into spaces with and taking a step back and asking community, what are some of the localized expertise that you have? What are some of the ways that we can use your lived experience to inform our work together, our processes together, and potentially how you would like to be engaged? And lastly, this commitment, a commitment to both long-term and sustainable outcomes. And we'll talk a little bit about what actually leads to sustainability a little bit later. And lastly, I just want to reaffirm this requires, again, relationship building, trust, developing the trust, developing shared goals, and consistency. So some of the why does design impact do community engagement? Why should you do community engagement? Some of the main things that we've seen that's come from our partnerships and our collaborations is community engagement helps keep stakeholders informed. A lot of times, as you can imagine, sometimes community engagement is done around community and not with community. And so communities oftentimes ask at the end of processes, at the end of projects, who wanted this? Who suggested that we need this? Or their intentions, their goals don't align with some of our recommendations as quote unquote experts or outside institutions who at our core are trying to do good. It helps us to check our ideas to make sure they're resonating. And when we're thinking about sustainability and ideas around sustainability, one of the major opportunities for sustainability is when you help to collaborate and co-create ideas with community and use their expertise to guide these ideas. Helps us gain support and advocacy at the grassroots level. It ensures our strategies work with and for communities. So we're not working on communities, but we're working with and for them. And lastly, it invites community into our processes. I think a lot of times we underestimate how much community members have to say, how much communities like to be involved, and oftentimes ignore the ways that they are already being successful in creating solutions, creating ideas, creating programming in their own everyday lives. And so this graphic you see on the right side is essentially a reminder to say, we want you to think about community engagement as moving from strictly being informed by community, so asking for community input, going to do a 3-question survey, to actually engaging them throughout your process. So engaging them from both the start, from decision-making, the ideation stage, into the actual implementation. So to reiterate why design impact centers community, we found that the best way to get sustainable solutions, some of these words are going to keep coming up, sustainability, is by co-creating them with those who are most affected by whatever issue we're tackling. By centering those with lived experience who are most impacted by inequities, we find that we are better equipped to find solutions that lead to greater equity. So when you asking people who are experiencing the inequities we are hoping to overcome, with the inequities we're hoping to solve for, by working hand in hand and acknowledging the expertise and the lived experience that these people have, we're finding more creative, more innovative solutions. By engaging community authentically, this allows everyone involved to feel ownership and to examine how solutions turn out together. So again, this co-creation process, we're going to keep reiterating this throughout our time today. And finally, working with, not for, a community opens a path towards a more equitable, inclusive outcomes. So why we send the community? This is one of the things, again, you should probably screenshot it. You can use this later on. By collaborating with community, we get closer to asking the right questions, to building stronger relationships, making new connections where needed, and uncovering deeper insights that we hope to lead to more equitable outcomes. So I know you're wondering, so how do I do that? That sounds very lofty, Dr. Curtis and Sarah. That sounds great and all, but I don't have the patience, I don't have the budget, I don't have the know-how. And we just want to acknowledge too that we understand that there are people with different levels of projects. There are people with different experience with community engagement. So we are going to recommend sort of 6 principles that we have at Design Impact, whether you're at the beginning of your project, you're thinking about how might I want to engage communities, or you're in the middle, and this can serve as sort of a self-check to say, this is the way I have been working, but maybe I should consider this in my work practices moving forward.
All right, so to get into it, to get into the how, we have 6 principles. The very first one, first and foremost, to equitable community engagement, is remembering why we are engaging community in the first place. And that's because communities know best what they need. Valuing lived experience means that we enter every engagement with community trusting that they are the experts in their own lives and that they can and should play a powerful role in shaping what happens to them. A lot of well-meaning folks come into communities thinking, oh, I've researched this issue. I know all about this. I'm an expert here. I know this community well. I know what this community needs. Part of the reason that's dangerous is because our society has conditioned us to value certain forms of expertise as more valuable than others. And if we want to engage community equitably, we need to challenge those assumptions. So invite y'all to think about what assumptions you might be making consciously or subconsciously. Maybe it's based on what kind of job someone has, or their race, their social identity, how much money we think they have, how much education we think they have, how they talk. Valuing lived experiences means that we bring community to the table because of their strengths and the wisdom that they bring, not just because of the needs they might have. And valuing lived experience means honoring the issues, the stories, the histories that community members bring to the table because of that lived experience.
Number two, as Sarah mentioned, a lot of this, sometimes this is self-work that we have to do. And number one, we talked about valuing different forms of experience. And part of that comes with acknowledging, where do I sit positionally? What's my positionality? What power, what privilege do I bring to our working groups? What power and privilege do I bring to our tables? And part of that, and as you will see, all of these are interwoven. The second principle is asking ourselves, what do we really need community feedback on? How many times have you all done work with community and you've encountered someone and they say, why are you doing this again? What do you need now? Haven't I already said this? Haven't I already done this? So one of the practices that we have implemented, and one thing that we want to share with you all today, is asking ourselves, how is engagement fatigue impacting the communities that we hope to serve? And how can we honor what the community has already shared with us and ask ourselves what's in it for them? If we're continuously asking ourselves and continuously prioritizing community engagement, how do we build on what we already know, what we've already done, without further taxing people who already have limited time, limited resources, et cetera? What are the ways that you can use some of the existing mechanisms, the existing engagement that you already have, and not keep doing the same thing over and over and over again? And I think part of this, going back to acknowledging our power and privilege, is acknowledging that other people have different types of power and different types of time commitments, different types of experiences, and also are simply just tired of different groups coming to them, asking them the same questions.
And part of that engagement fatigue often comes with being asked for things without being fairly compensated. So our third principle that we try to live by is compensating people for their time and expertise. This might sound like a small thing, but it often goes unnoticed or worse, unplanned for, and it can sneak up on us. So it's actually key to engage in community equity, to value people for their expertise, value their time, right? Time is money. And that's no different for the communities that we're engaging. It's really simple, right? We pay people for their contributions. And if y'all are stuck on where to start, an easy place to start is just by offering an hourly stipend based on a living wage. But this is also a space to get creative, right? So think about how you could engage community and compensate them in a way that it might be a path to economic mobility, a path to capacity building. Find those community connectors, pay them to be ambassadors. We've actually had really great success in bringing community members on as paid core team members to do all that planning with us, as part-time staff, as contractors. And all of this helps us go deeper to get to that sustainability. And this is a simple thing to build into your budget up front and continue to hold yourselves accountable to as you go through the process. Pay people for showing up.
And when you're paying people to show up, again, we're going to circle back around to this, go beyond just simply asking them for their input. Go beyond feedback. One of the things we talk a lot about at Design Impact is sort of the co-creation process. And what we're asking you all to do today is invite community members into leadership roles that will allow them to help own your collaboration, your process, allow them to help design the process. So what does it look like? And also allow them to help develop solutions and be a part of the implementation process. So here, as you read in the description, we're asking people to move from simply community input to community ownership. And by moving to community ownership, we think that this is a smooth transition into moving into community power as well too, because what you're doing here, and as we said, these are interwoven, you're centering community expertise, you're centering community strength, you're centering community assets in the way that you're thinking about innovative and creative solutions to complex social problems.
Our fifth principle is giving room to heal. So when we're inviting folks in, when we're practicing that art of the invitation, this is also about being ready to invite all of them. This can mean that we need to be sensitive to the trauma folks may have due to lived experiences of racism, of poverty, displacement, disenfranchisement, inequity. In practice, a lot of times this means slowing down. I think we could all feel that collective shift in the energy and even this virtual room when Ashley really slowed us down at the start of this session. Using things like check-ins, mindfulness practices, grounding practices, co-created agreements. These help us show up with empathy and give space for folks to share. But when we give that space, we also need to be ready to honor what we hear. And for those of us who may hold privilege, this is about doing our own work too. Giving room to heal means building our own understanding of how we arrive in a space. This is critical to racial equity work. Understanding, as Dr. Curtis said earlier, who holds power? Whose voice is going to carry sway in the room? How do we interrupt that? How are race and power dynamics impacting who has the freedom to dissent, to offer a different path forward? How do we interrupt that? Race and power dynamics are going to be there whether we acknowledge them or not. So it is incumbent on us to learn how to navigate them with humility and self-awareness. To truly give room to heal, we need to go beyond our good intentions and be ready to stay present, even when it's hard, to hear that our ideas aren't working, or we need to take a step back, or we need to change the plan. And this is also related to our readiness to admit when we mess up, because as I think we are going to hear from our next session, things are going to get messy.
In our last principle, building in those accountability measures, being able to honor the places people need healing directly ties into building in accountability measures. So what are the ways that you're thinking about keeping your promises, following up with community, and developing your ways to hold yourself accountable to what you said you were going to offer, you were going to share with community? As Sarah mentioned, a lot of times we have to assess our privilege. And I think a great example of that is how a lot of times different nonprofits who are primarily ran by white individuals work with communities of color, and a lot of the tension that comes from those ongoing relationships, a lot of the promises that were broken, a lot of the commitments that weren't followed through on. What are the ways, how can you develop some processes or some accountability measures in your collaborations to say, this is what you can expect from me from beginning to end. This is what you can expect from me once we're no longer walking hand to hand doing this work together. Think about some simple things like a community accountability statement. What are the ways that people can get to you directly? And I think that's one thing we have to be vulnerable with, allowing people to be able to have access to us directly, to call us out when we're not necessarily following the trajectory that communities hope we will follow. And so those are our 6 principles. And we wouldn't leave you, it wouldn't be us if we didn't leave you with more questions to consider. So we want to give you some opportunities to reflect on what it looks like to center community in inclusive and equitable community engagement that correspond. And don't worry, you can screenshot this, of course, but we'll also be sharing a document on the next slide with you that has all this information. But the questions are, how might we value lived experience as a form of expertise throughout this process? So think about your current engagements. What are some ways that you can center lived experience of the communities you hope to impact? What has community already shared? And what will community gain? So we're asking people to give up their valuable time to work with us, or give up their valuable space, or change something or alter something about their lives to work with us. But what are the actual benefits? Be explicit about that. How might we make sure people are compensated for their time and contributions? Sarah talked a lot about this earlier, whether that's living wages, whether that's helping helping better position people for economic mobility, et cetera. Acknowledging, how might we highlight the strengths of community in our engagements? A lot of time our community engagements are framed through a deficit lens. And so we're going to communities and asking, how can I help you solve what's wrong with you? What we oftentimes stress at Design Impact is to flip that and say, what are the strengths that I can help you amplify? How can I share my resources with you and help you amplify the existing strengths that you already have, the existing ways that you already have to ideate and to solve the solutions and social problems that you deal with every day? Because we have to be honest with ourselves. People are solving and ideating and creating solutions to deal with these social problems every single day that a lot of times we just often ignore because they didn't come from us. Where might we encounter challenges and trauma, and how are we prepared to address them? And finally, how might we hold ourselves accountable to the community? This one is the big one. Think about how you are currently holding yourself accountable in your community engagement, or how do you plan to hold yourself accountable to your community engagement practices? So our call to action for you today as I close, and we'll be sharing in the chat now the document that recaps a lot of what we were talking about, is what's one word or phrase that reflects something that can carry you forward throughout this convening and into your work? And what we like to do too is ask, what's one word or phrase that you can do by next Wednesday to incorporate something you learned today into your practices, both either moving forward or something that you currently have ongoing? And feel free to share that with us in the chat. And also, and has thankfully put the handout also in the chat for you today as well too. So we would love to read those words, and we'll ask you to continue to reflect on that as you move forward today and over the next weeks in your work. Thank you all so much.